On today's episode,
just as the Lord's Prayer, of all the petitions, only one is focused on the things that we most likely pray for, our daily needs, our physical things like that. The emphasis is on the spiritual. When we are praying for people in response to some tragic news or something like that, don't get so caught up in the physical needs and the intricacies of their situations that you neglect to pray for them spiritually, for their spiritual health. Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischmann and Jeff Samelson. And today's episode is going to be on the topic of thoughts and prayers. This is an episode that we have been wanting to record, I think, like maybe 6 weeks or so now. And it came up when there were some tragedies and things in the news, and thinking about this topic, how many people, many Christians will offer thoughts and prayers, or maybe just many people in general, too, during a time of tragedy. And sometimes it is very hard to know what to say when something happens. And then more and more tragedies and different things have come up even since that too, and I'm sure there'll be many more. But it just really begs the question too, is this the best thing to say? And what is really meant by this topic of thoughts and prayers? Because there is a lot of criticism from people that say, well, Christians, all you do is offer thoughts and prayers. And so we just wanted to pull apart this topic and talk about it today. Where we maybe want to start our focus is with the criticism that there is around this topic. And Jeff, if you'd maybe like to kind of expand a little bit on what the criticism is, and then if there is any validity to any of it.
Yeah, it's understandable in a sense that if you witness, whether it's just on the news or personally, or it happens to you, something really tragic, something catastrophic, and people that you think should be doing something in response to that say nothing more than, oh, you have my thoughts and prayers, or something like that. You're going to feel, well, wait a second, that's meaningless. There's something you could be doing. And that's really where the validity does come in, because too often many people do actually respond to something like this as it's really nothing more than a sop, a kind of, well, something bad happened, and well, I should say something, so I'll say this and make it look like I care, when they really don't care all that much. It's just checking off a box saying, okay, I said something appropriate. But sometimes also this thoughts and prayers is offered actually in place of action, or of thoughtful words that can be of actual and perhaps immediate benefit. Imagine having an accident and being brought to the emergency room and having the doctor examine you and say, you'll be in my thoughts and prayers. You'd say, well, wait a second. There's something more you should be doing here. Or imagine you tell a good friend some really terrible news about a death in your family, and she says, oh, you'll be in my thoughts and prayers. But hey, did you hear what Janet was wearing at the party last week? Or you just like, well, wait a second. There should be more there, and that's where the criticism is valid.
One of the things that's very common today is at the end of conversations, people say, well, love you. And of course, I'm thinking, well, you don't even know me. There's a lot about our faith that can be superficially practiced. And that was always a problem, certainly in the Old Testament. They were criticized about you go through the motions, you hear, but you're not listening. You see, but you're not watching. In other words, there's a superficiality about it all. And quite honestly, I'm as guilty as the next person. One of my morbid hobbies is sometimes if I'm going to a visitation of at the funeral home of somebody that, I kind of know and the family, I sometimes like to sit close to the front because I like to listen to kind of the unusual and awkward things people say because they don't know what to say and they don't know what to do. Well, that's kind of how I feel about the thoughts and prayers comments, is that sometimes people, genuinely don't know what to do. And I've encountered that myself. It's what we're going through with Diane's brain cancer and so forth. There's a lot of people who don't know what to do. And so they'll say, well, you're on our prayer list. We're remembering you in prayer and so forth. And I presume they are. There's a few of them who actually go out of their way to show that it's true. There's a church that out of the clear blue, every once in a while, I'll get a card from them that says that somehow we're still on their radar. So there is a lot to this. I do recall, though, under the reign of King Saul, remember Saul kind of drifted away from God and was trying to kill David and that kind of stuff. The people kind of drifted away with Saul. And so Samuel comes and they say, about would you pray for us, and Samuel says, I would be sinning if I didn't pray for you. And that was kind of jarring when I read that, because there were times in my ministry where, I'd go to a pastor's conference and I'd hear other pastors who would talk about beginning their day with a list of a physical list of members in their congregation and how they would just pray about it. And so I was always struck that Samuel would say that I'd be sinning if I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And because every inclination of the heart is evil, leave it to us to quickly take something as noble and as right as prayer and make it something superficial. We just tend to do it. But in defense of people, sometimes there isn't anything else you can do.
Bob, you touched on a lot there. And I think one of the things, too, when you said people just don't know what to do, and that is why maybe they offered that. Are there any other reasons that would maybe make the criticism with thoughts and prayers not valid?
Yeah, well, if you're the one making that criticism, you're presuming that you know what that other person's feelings and motivations and opportunities and abilities actually are, when that hasn't been communicated. You're assuming there's something more the other person could be doing, or you're assuming that it's merely superficial. And that's rarely fair or just. Another thing is that when you're making that criticism, and this I think is true of a lot of the stuff that's gone public after some tragedy or something, and the people are there, you people with your thoughts and prayers, this is useless. Offer something that's of actual value. What it betrays is a disbelief or weak belief in the power of prayer. As Bob was talking about this, prayer is just this wonderful privilege, this powerful thing that we are given as Christians to do. And I'll put it this way: the merely human response, or justification of saying you're in my thoughts and prayers is you're saying, I care, I sympathize, I understand how awful this is. This affects me, and it's going to stay in my mind. Just on a human to human level, that's a connection. That has value. But for the Christian, when we say you're going to be in my thoughts and prayers, you're saying this matters so much to me that I'm going to use my privilege as a child of God to intervene. I'm going to go to him. I'm going to hold him to his promises to me and to others, and I'm going to ask him to exercise his compassion and use his power on your behalf. That's what it means when a Christian says you're going to be in my prayers, or at least that's what it should mean. And to assume that somebody's just brushing you off with a comment like that's not good.
One of the problems I have is I get requests from people. It'll come to me like this: I have a friend that's going through a real hard time right now. Would you just say a prayer for them? And of course, my first reaction is, for whom? What's the problem? What am I? I already ask God all the time for his kingdom to come, his will to be done. And you haven't even given me a name, let alone to bring something specific. I've always been frustrated by that because it's almost treating the request for prayer as superficially as we sometimes are being accused of treating prayer. It's like, if we just get everybody to talk to God about this, he'll figure it out. He'll know who it is, and of course I know that, but I always just find it frustrating. I'm more into specifics, if somebody's a hard time in marriage, I'd like to talk to God about that and then try to add to my prayer if there's something I can do to help make that path clear, which I think satisfies a little bit of the concern, Jeff, that you raised about people who could be doing more. I always remember, this is like 30 years ago. We had a good friend of ours.
I was 10.
You were 10, yeah. And she had talked about, there was a lady in the congregation who had breast cancer, and with her breast cancer was this incredible testimony of faith. And so she said, and I have it filmed. We got it on video someplace. And she said, so I prayed to God that I would someday have that kind of boldness of faith and everything. And she said, and then one day I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which she wasn't expecting, and it later took her life. But she was incredibly bold because she had prayed. She literally said, I was looking for an avenue that I might glorify God and serve others. So she was remarkable. But a lot of times we kind of overlook that. First of all, you go to God. Why? Because he's your father. He's the one you should have your most intimate, confidential discussions with. Secondly, he's Lord of all, so he can do things. But third, this is not a get off the hook option. Now use me as your servant.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions, too, that I wanted to talk about was this idea of how might being a Christian perhaps make it harder to respond to the news of some tragedy or great need.
We represent Christ. So we have a high standard to live up to, and often high expectations, sometimes false, from the people that we meet or who interact with us or whatever. We want to reflect Christ, reflect who we are, reflect our identity. We want to be wise and loving. We want to think more of the other person than of ourselves, all those things. And this can be a challenge in any situation because we're not perfect, but especially when there's a lot of emotion involved or there's some kind of relational or cultural baggage attached to a situation. It just makes it difficult because we understand there is a higher standard. And maybe people are holding us to it, or maybe it's just a standard we're holding ourselves to. But it's something that we have in mind when we're thinking, okay, how should I respond? What should I do?
If we were a bit more proactive in thinking of others ahead of ourselves, it raises the question, what should be the content of our prayer? We talk to God, and sometimes we treat God a little bit like a therapist. It bothers us that somebody's going through a hard time, and so we talk to God about it. And of course, nowadays, we can replace God in that role with AI. That's the big controversy going on, is that people start treating AI like a therapist. God is the one we go to because he's the one from whom all blessings flow. He is the Lord over life and of death. Everything is in his hands. There's certain things that we know about God, and he does permit hardship to come into lives. So it does narrow down the question, what do we ask about? I think the reason prayer sounds always so superficial nowadays is because people have contentless prayers. In other words, I'm not asking for anything in particular, but I really feel bad, and I feel bad that they feel bad. So if you can help them not feel bad, that would be good. It's not a bad thing to ask for, but is that really all that you want to ask for? I always think of the prayer that when Jeff and I are stepping into a pulpit, you've seen the pastor bow his head and say a prayer. Do you ever wonder what we pray? I don't know what Jeff prays, but I know what I pray, and that is, help me despite myself. In other words, my fobbling, my stumbling over the words, remove all barriers so that they hear your message. And that's it. I mean, there's a clear intent. It's not just a pious bowing of my head for display. Now, when we look at the national scene, and on the national scene, our thoughts and prayers are with the family. That's oftentimes what our leaders will say. And again, I'm going to take them at their word, that they're both thinking about them and that they're praying about them. When my dad died, which I still, I just told somebody the other day, I don't think I have fully processed it yet. But when he died, I remember, my prayer to God was, somehow make it beneficial so that your kingdom is furthered from it. In other words, there was an object to the prayer. There was a purpose for the prayer. And I think we miss that a lot. But I think going through what I've gone through with Diane and then with my dad has done wonders for my prayer life.
Yeah, I think, that is really a great point too, Bob, how we should pray in response to bad news, the kind of things that we should ask for. What are some things that maybe are really good to ask for in these moments of tragedy?
Well, we should be asking for comfort for the people who need comfort. That's the way I often pray, is you just, Lord, give them what they need. If it's X, then X. If Y, then Y. Particularly when somebody's suffering a death in the family, I often pray for strength for them, because I recognize that that's sometimes just getting up the next morning and thinking of all the things that you've got to face without your loved one. You need that strength. Help through grief. Perhaps somebody who's been dealing with grief for a really long time, you might be asking that they are able to come to the end of it. If I knew Bob's situation, I could be praying, help him process his father's death, if that was something that I knew to be the issue there. And if it comes to some major national tragedy or something like that, you're going to be praying about, not just about the people involved, but how this affects the nation's politics, how this affects, in some cases, the economy of an area. It's just, you think about all the things that have gone wrong or that could go wrong, and you pray about those things.
Yeah, interesting too, as you were talking, like you were talking about the things you'd think of. And then I kind of thought, oh yeah, it kind of does link the thoughts and prayers part of it for a Christian. We can think about these things and put serious amount of thought into our prayers. It's kind of a neat thing, neat connection.
About, I don't know, maybe 8-10 months ago, I was listening to some podcast or something, and they were one of the theologians, they were talking about prayer, and he made the observation that in the Lord's Prayer, it begins with adoration of God. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And his point is that, when you're called, you're created in life to glorify God in all things. That really is the starting point to prayer. So having heard that, and then I started reading through the Psalms, and it's amazing how the Psalms, there's a point to the Psalms sometimes, but you don't get to it till like midway through. The whole beginning is, you formed the heavens, you created the world, out of nothing came something, all of these wonderful and very large statements about God. I've tried to bring that into my prayer life. Now, it's starting off with, first of all, before I get to my petition list, everything I'm going to ask for, I'm going to first of all acknowledge why I'm here in the first place. And that is because there's nobody I know in my entire life who can do what you can do. The other day, I was with a real good friend, and they were going through some wrestling, just going through some things. So then afterwards, I go to God and I go, I don't know the exact words because I don't know everything that's on his mind. I don't know. I said, but God, you know all things, and I know that you know all things. We see that in Scripture. In other words, you first of all remind God why, out of all the sources of solution, you started with him. So I come to you first. Okay, now I ask. And then your requests, your petitions are always enveloped within the parentheses of thy will be done. Because there's the passage which kind of throws you for a curve that says, if you believe, you'll get it. And it's like, I wanted that girlfriend when I was in high school. I believed in Jesus. Why didn't I get that particular girlfriend? Because it wasn't within the context of thy will be done. Well, that's kind of like you pray for comfort, but sometimes what if God decides I'm going to withhold comfort for a while yet? Well, then am I equally satisfied when God doesn't provide the comfort? You learn that from the Apostle Paul. I prayed 3 times for this to be taken from me. And it wasn't. So I rejoice in my sufferings. It makes for a great reading, epistle reading. It's really hard to practice that, though. But that's really a good example, I think.
Yeah, your mention of the Lord's Prayer, Bob, reminds me of something I should have answered before. Just as the Lord's Prayer, of all the petitions, only one is focused on the things that we most likely pray for, our daily needs, our physical things like that. The emphasis is on the spiritual. When we are praying for people in response to some tragic news or something like that, don't get so caught up in the physical needs and the intricacies of their situations that you neglect to pray for them spiritually, for their spiritual health. Pray that people who are recovering from this natural disaster, that they are open to people from churches who come, that they listen to, that this becomes an opportunity, that they hear the gospel. Pray that this tragic death in your friend's family not become something that embitters him and turns him away from God, but rather becomes something that draws him to God and to his Savior in Jesus. Don't neglect to pray for those things. I think sometimes we feel that, oh wow, that would be kind of awfully forward of me to insert myself in between him and God. It's like, no, that's what that's what prayer is for, and that's what love is. Really, your primary concern. So don't get so caught up in the minutia of, he needs this and she needs that and they need this other thing, that you neglect to talk about the most important thing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. This discussion too with thoughts and prayers, and specifically that phrase too. Is there something that would maybe be better to say than just thoughts and prayers? What would maybe be a more appropriate response?
What can I do? I always thought you lead with what can I do? Our board chairman and I were talking the other day about this crazy, Clifton Strengths testing thing. And we always joke because empathy on mine, out of the 34 strengths, empathy is like 30. And Jim goes, that doesn't seem right. And I said, I don't wear empathy on my sleeve, but I'm horribly empathetic. Probably the word horribly is correct. I mean, I feel every pain and every sorrow and stuff. And, but it's in my nature to always be proactive. Why? Because prayer is something I do privately. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Krista, when your father, when you had to fly down to Texas for your dad and stuff. And we, so Diane and I immediately, we did something, we brought some food over into the house and everything. But I don't talk about, and so this is the first time you're hearing this, I don't talk about coming home and starting to cry and praying to God, for guidance to help you and so forth. So in other words, I'm not saying I guess what I am saying is you lead with the desire to serve. And part of the arsenal of service is prayer. So if you start and do something first, now maybe you need to pray and say, God, guide me, that what I do first is what's most needed. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not sure all of the candy and the sweets that I bought for your kid was necessarily appreciated by your husband, but
the kids loved it.
The kids loved it. I've been popular with them ever since.
They called you Bobby Fleischmann. that was the moment where I realized, okay, I need to start calling you Pastor Fleischmann in front of them. But no, I mean, kind of to the point too. I think like if you know somebody, maybe then you can do something more for them. Or what I have even just done too, like if I see somebody post something on Facebook that is just like hard going on in their life, I will just send them a personal message with a prayer in it. And I think sometimes that is a nice thing to do because I think, maybe one of you earlier in this episode mentioned too that, or just alluded to the fact that sometimes we say, or people say thoughts and prayers, and then they don't actually pray for that. If you are going to use that phrase or tell somebody that you're praying for them, it probably is a good practice to do it right away, maybe before
Yeah.
you forget.
Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously, we know too as Christians that praying is an awesome thing to do. I mean, it isn't the least we can do. It really is such a great and almost the most we can do in some ways too. And so just to really be able to actually pray when we say we're going to do that.
Yeah. A lot depends on your relationship to the person you're responding to. I mean, if this is, somebody you just met at the store and you're never going to see again, the depth of your response is going to change. And if you say, what can I do? It's like, well, you're never going to see me again. There's not a whole lot there. But on the other hand, if this is somebody that you're fairly close to, you can ask, how can I pray for you? Which gives them an opportunity then to share more deeply what's on their minds, what they're going through, what their struggles are.
Also communicates that you're specific. You're not being generic with them.
Yeah. If this is a distant tragedy and you feel you need to be saying something about it, think, okay, yeah, what is there that I can do? There's been this flooding. Okay, maybe I should contribute to the Red Cross. Maybe I should find some way to give some practical assistance, or maybe part of my response is just going to be, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that doesn't happen around here to people that I care about, because it's reminded me of my responsibilities here. There are all sorts of things to do, and you need to be thinking. Again, the point you were making before, your thinking connects to your prayers. It's like, how can I keep this from being shallow? How can I make this be something? The old "what would Jesus do?" There's some lesson from his example, obviously. Okay, how would my Lord have responded to this if someone had come to him or he had learned this news? What might he have done? Granted, we can't perform miracles, but we can pray for them. But what would he have said? What would he wanted to know? And take him as an example in that, and that will probably inspire you to do more than just say the minimum and just do the minimum.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is trying to translate prayer as one tool of a number of things that we can do. Now, what is also interesting is the variety of what people can do. I think of a lot of times when I have served as vacancy pastor and pastor of congregations, and I've had there's a death in the congregation, so I sit down with the widow or the widower. They go through kind of a phase of uselessness. I used to always fix meals for them, and I used to always do this, always do that. What can I do? I can't do anymore. I don't even drive. And it is interesting how through life, God either reveals that you have abilities that you didn't know you had before, or stamina you didn't know you had before, or through life, sometimes you lose some of that. And then what happens when you're confined to a wheelchair? It's not just all I can do, or I only can do prayer. This is not a small matter. When you basically, by acknowledging that you're going to pray, you're telling somebody, I have an inside track. I can help.
Yeah.
And you're going to use it.
This whole topic puts in mind for me the letter of James, in the Bible, that in chapter 2, he makes this very strong point. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says that he has faith but has no works? Such faith cannot save him, can it? If a brother or sister needs clothes and lacks daily food, and one of you tells him, go in peace, keep warm and eat well, but does not give them what their body needs, what good is it? So that's addressing that criticism. You're just saying something good, but you're not actually doing what you can do. But in the same letter at the end in chapter 5, James tells us the prayer of a righteous man or righteous person is able to do much because it is effective. Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. Then he prayed again, and the sky gave rain, and the land produced its harvest. So after making that earlier point about do something, he also comes back at the end of the letter and just says, and pray. It's going to make a difference. You're going to God. Things will happen because you prayed. So do it, and do it for other people.
Well, that's a great point, Jeff. And thank you both for the discussion today. Thank you for all your thoughts. We appreciate it. If anybody has any questions on this topic or any others, please reach us at lifechallenges.us, and we'll see you back next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.